All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for season 6 of Nautical Nights. For those of you joining online and for those of you joining in person, thank you so much for joining. We are doing a hybrid model. We've done a couple of these now, and they've been working fairly well. There's always a learning curve with them, but we welcome any feedback at the end, and thank you anyways for your patience, and we hope you enjoy the evening. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started, and this is mainly, actually it's directed at both people joining in person as well as people joining virtually. For those of you who are joining in person, I would ask that you turn your volume down on your phones or turn them off. All those things that you forget about when you're going back to in-person events. And then for those of you joining virtually, you're welcome to engage in the conversation this evening by submitting questions or comments in the YouTube chat. We will also have a Q&A option at the end where you can submit your questions online, and I'll make sure that they get answered. If your YouTube chat function isn't working, you're welcome to send questions to our email address, marmus@marmuseum.ca. That's marmus@marmuseum.ca. I will put that email address in the chat in just a few moments. Another housekeeping item, there's a number of you who've purchased the winter package ticket. Thank you. It's quite an exciting list of speakers we have again this year, and I'm very pleased that you are purchasing the package and will be joining us all season. For those of you who have purchased the package, please make sure that you use the code that's in that confirmation email to go and register for the remainders. When you put the code in, you'll make sure that it will make sure that cost at the end is 0 because you've already purchased them. It just makes sure that you are on the list for the upcoming ones. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to give me a call or come find me, and I'll be happy to make that setup for you. We are very grateful to have Jim McRae, a Nautical Nights alumnus, join us this evening, and very grateful to him for having brought a couple of prizes that we're going to be giving out this evening. We will be running first a contest, so anyone who's asking questions, their name will get entered into a draw to win a poster that he'll share shortly. And we will also be running a trivia question at the end, so if you answer the question correctly, depending on how many we get, I think we might enter the questions into a draw, but if we get that one answer that is correct, we will make sure that you receive a copy of the book that we have available here as well. So thank you very much, Jim, for making that possible. Right, so welcome everyone. For those of you who haven't joined a Nautical Night speaker event in the past, very grateful to have you for this one to be your first one. And we're all about connecting people with our local maritime heritage, whether that's history, geography, environment. And that sometimes that maritime heritage ends up being a little farther afield than the Great Lakes, but quite often it all comes back to the water, and that's what we're obviously all about as well. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the waterways and land located within the Great Lakes catchment area have a long history predating establishment of European settlements. The waterways in particular are to be acknowledged as the traditional trade routes of the indigenous peoples, together providing a network of trade and travel routes essential to communities since time immemorial. The Marine Museum of the Great Lakes at Kingston acknowledges the site it sits on and the water it interacts with to be the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat people of the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy. We thank these nations for the care and stewardship of this land and water, and we look forward to building partnerships for that ongoing stewardship in the future. This evening, as I indicated, we have an alumnus Nautical Nights presenter, Jim McRae, joining us. Jim McRae is the president of Griffintown Media, a Montreal-based graphic design and custom content agency that also publishes books, magazines, and apps. Apps being those things that you find on your computers. Jim has authored, edited, and published various works, including his most recent, Seaway Queens, The Style and Grace of Legendary Lakers. He is married and has 2 adult daughters. I would invite you in person and virtually to join me in welcoming Jim to the front, and I hope you enjoy his presentation. Keep a close listen out for the answer to perhaps that trivia question at the end, which Jim will ask. Thank you, Jim, for joining us.
I noticed they serve beer and wine at the venue. It's my best venue ever, so thank you for having me. Michelle, thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you for the invitation tonight. It's very kind of you and Doug to have me. Quick congratulations to you and your team, and Chris and the board, for the work you're all doing to reimagine the museum, including and especially through community engagement, such as events like these. Is very important. Thank you also to the Kingston Yacht Club for being such warm hosts tonight. I'm proud to be invited to kick off the 6th annual Nautical Nights Winter Series, and it's great to see all those who have attended, to brave the cold to attend tonight, and also those attending online. A warm welcome to everyone. Happy New Year, by the way, to everyone too. The cold, it's snowing tonight, it's perfect actually. The cold, in fact, is where things got started for me and Seaway Queens long ago. I grew up in Montreal, and the men in my family and in my neighborhood would find winter work down on the docks when the ships laid up for the winter. As a boy, and this is 50 years ago, I followed the men when they went to work, especially at Christmas time and on weekends, which meant being around them in the ships and getting comfortable with both, actually, the environment of the ships and the people who brought me there. I would simply jump on board as they worked, because safety and security weren't a big thing back then. It was just a thing. You just got on the ship. It wasn't a big deal. Wonderful time. Over time, I found myself getting part-time jobs, just like they had, on the ships to make extra money for school. So I do that in the summer and also on Christmas break. Eventually, and this is skipping ahead a lot, I founded a design agency in Montreal where we do custom design and publishing, and including our latest work, Seaway Queens, as Michelle had pointed out. We do all manner of creative material, and including apps, most recently, and I'll tell you a bit about the app we have related to the book a bit later on tonight. The book was published in November of 2022, and it's been making its way across North America since, with all the customers who've been supporting us. The book itself focuses, quite frankly, on the classic Seaway ships from the mid-century, last century. Those with the forward and after houses and the expansive decks, everyone knows that, and their streamlined features, right? So our focus is on the aesthetic of the ships. So if you have any technical questions tonight, I'll send them to my brother. He's better than me at that stuff, But the main aspect we wanted to bring out in the conversation with the book was the design, and especially the Art Deco influences of some of the ships from the mid-century, not all, some, but especially like the ones on the cover, like the one on the cover, and some of those inside, especially the Edward Ryerson, if you're familiar with the ship, is the most famous and probably most beautiful ship ever on the inland. And during her heyday, she was celebrated for being custom designed and custom appointed, including its interior. Her interior was, I think she had air conditioning for the first time on the lakes. I think she had an owner's lounge and things like this. They were very comfortable on board, but she's also very beautiful. The Art Deco movement started in Europe. So by the time these ships were being built in mid-century, last century, the movement had, quite frankly, begun to diminish in Europe. But in North America, we still saw influences of Art Deco in design, in everything from architecture to interior design to toasters to industrial transportation. So when we look at some of these ships, we could see that influence of Art Deco in their design. Very proud and confident, forward-leaning sort of aesthetic, and it's very attractive in an elegant way to industrial design, which not always is the first reason to design anything. In industrial design, you have to make money with your design, but they put a lot of attitude towards making it beautiful as well, and which is really important. I mentioned the best example of this would have been the Edward Ryerson. We have a poster of the Ryerson tonight as part of our gift giving. Ken is probably sharing that. Ken is the technician tonight on the meeting, and he'll be showing the poster that we've done, which companions the book, Seaway Queens. The poster was done in honor, or sorry, related to the Cassandra poster of, I believe it was in the 1930s of the transatlantic liner Normandy. So the poster that Cassandra designed is where we took our inspiration for the poster that we'll talk about tonight. And perhaps we'll pull one out of the box later on to show you guys. As for the structure of the book, the content itself, and also the images, illustrations, and so on within the book, we focused our attention on creating 10 chapters, which have themes. The themes range from everything from technology to the environment to cruise. And we made a special effort to relate everything back to the Great Lakes trade, Great Lakes Seaway trade. That's why the book title is Seaway Queens is very intentional. So the 10 chapters will always find a start and an end towards reflecting this vessel design in our homeland trade here in North America. We don't forget the saltwater trade. We in fact mention it throughout the book, but the principal focus is inland freshwater vessels. The book contains well over 100 photos, illustrations, and graphic treatments, including ship drawings, parts of ship drawings, and full ship drawings as well, that quite frankly we borrowed from the Kingston Museum through various partner collections, including those of Canada Steamship Lines, which are safeguarded here at the museum. And a lot of the content in the book happily will be shared with your visits to the museum. When you do go to new and reopened museum, you'll see some of our photograph archives that have arrived in the book as being present also at the museum when you do visit. The storytelling in the book is a bit different. There are a lot of books on the market about the Great Lakes that focus on the technical aspects of the ships and the trades they ply, and they're good, and they probably do that part better than we do. Our book, though, tells stories, and it does so probably in a hopefully engaging and colorful way. And if it's a bit too colorful, you can blame me, but I try to have fun with the language and sort of tell the stories in a way that was different and was intentional towards creating a romantic element towards the storytelling aspect of the book. Because if anyone has had the pleasure of speaking with people who work in the industry on the vessels, they're very colorful. They'll tell you stories, and they're mostly all true, and be happy to share a coffee with you and time with you. They come across first as a bit conservative when you visit the vessel. That's because you're stepping onto their home. But once you get to know them, they'll treat you like family in their home. So that was important. That was an important aspect of the book. Ultimately, we wanted to create a living document, the book, that pays homage to the past, but does so in a modern way with opportunities to continue the dialogue of inclusive and contemporary subjects and issues. Michelle mentioned some of these issues and subjects that they try to include in their curriculum at the museum. That's what we want to do. We want to honor the past, but not be stuck in it, and also find ways of introducing perhaps even technology on the book that can make the book itself a living document. We do this I created an app that's a companion app to the book. So what the app does on your phone, it links images, static images from the book, and sparks or creates a video that occurs on your smartphone. So if you see an image in the book, not all the images, some, they'll generate a video that relate to the content in the book and sort of enhances the content. So if you look at something like self-unloading technology, which we will introduce on the app, it's almost impossible to explain without seeing visuals, right? So if you have illustrations and photos, good. If you have videos, better. So what we plan to do is include more and more information from the book on our app so that people could begin to hear stories and understand some of the complexities of the vessels a bit better on their phones. So that's a fun aspect, and this is why I talk about a living document. We want the book to be growing. So although it's printed, bound, and shared traditionally through bookstores and so on, it'll grow. So we intend to add much more content to the book as we go forward, including by engaging some of the content providers who've helped us on the book, photographers, artists, Facebook influencers. I think we have one tonight, Ship Junkies, local influencer. But we also have, out of US, we have Know Your Ships, Roger Olive from Facebook community. And we have Andrea up in the Sioux, Dre Design, who's been helping us on the book. We also have photographers from across North America who have participated in the book. Andrew Russell out of Detroit, he does phenomenal still and video of lakes trading, and he's just a brilliant young man. So we're trying to include some of his video content through our app also on the book. That's really fun. So as we go forward, and if you're on any form of contact list with the museum, or even with us, I could let you know when more content becomes available on the app so that you could engage more content as we go forward. The app is called Live Print. It makes print come alive. As for interest in the book, we've been asked to present at events such as these. Newspapers have reached out to us for interviews and articles on the book, wanting to know why we've done this book and why it's important. We've also been engaged with podcasters. Most recently, we were featured on Downbound Discussions, which is a local podcaster just over the border here in New York. That was a very nice opportunity as well. And probably most interesting, at least to me, is we have a map that we keep updating. Wherever the book gets shipped, we put a pin on the map. And you'll be happy to learn that the Great Lakes community is not geographically bound by the Great Lakes. We've been sending books to South Carolina, Texas, California, British Columbia, lots of landlocked places. And you wouldn't think, right, that so many people would be interested in lakes trading or the lakes trade, but they are. And that's really, really an encouragement because it means that the story's good. And it means people love the ships as much as we all might love the ships. Everyone in the room tonight, you have compatriots out there who are supporting your belief. I could say a lot more about the book. I could be here all night, and you don't want that. But instead, I was thinking that we could maybe switch to dialogue, including questions from the audience and those members online who are watching, and maybe talk about the ships and talk about perhaps the book. Maybe answer a few questions, but I would love your input back as well. If you happen to have seen the book and read the book already, I'd like to know what you think of it. You can be critical if you like. I hope not, but it'd be fun to talk about it a bit. And with the help of Michelle, as she mentioned, we're going to give away a few gifts tonight. The book itself, and also a poster. So hopefully what we could do is have everyone who's in person have the opportunity to win a book or a poster, and likewise online, a book or a poster. So there will be 4 winners today. If there's more specific information you need about the book, you could find it on our website. It's called seawayqueens.com, and it'll give you all the information you need to know about it, including if you care to order it. So please feel free. And we also have presence on Facebook if you're following, and we will be updating a lot of the information on the book, including through the museum as we go forward, because Doug and Michelle have been very supportive, and I think they want to continue that on the project, and including perhaps when the museum is fully up and running, finding a way to maybe bring the app, Live Print, into the museum environment, because it's especially suited for young people, because young people love technology. So it'd be a nice experience for them as well. So Michelle, if you'd like to take us further, or if you'd like to open the floor to questions, we could do that, including questions online. I think Michelle has a question.
Related perhaps
you could, I'm sure there's quite a few anecdotes that you've come across in your research, but maybe share one or two of your favorites.
Yeah, for anecdotes in the book, it's funny because in some cases when I was working on the book, I went through specific personal reflection and brought some anecdotes to the fore in the book. So a lot of the content relates back to my experience and observations of being on the vessels and meeting with the crews. But then the research brought some more information forward too. One anecdote, and it relates locally, so that's always a good thing. I was working as a student, I mentioned this, and we were tasked with bringing a vessel. I was just a slave. My job wasn't important. We were tasked with bringing a vessel from Montreal that had been idled, from Montreal to Kingston for long-term layup. And it was to be laid up at the elevator. Doug, which way is the elevator from here?
West.
It's west. So we we brought the vessel into Kingston and laid her up. So as the men were doing their work and I was fooling around, I went up to the windlass on the upper deck, forward bow, and I looked at a handle on the windlass and I said, geez, I wonder what this does. And I turned it the wrong way and it paid out the anchor at a terrible pace and deafening sound. And I immediately reversed the handle. And my brother, who was the guy I talked about, he's the smartest person I know, ran up the deck when he heard the noise and the confusion and ran up and said, what happened? And I explained to him, I don't know. The anchor just kind of gave way. And he typically, he's the calmest guy, but he lost it. And he said, you don't know what you could have done. And he said, follow me. And I went over and we looked over the rail. And there was another idle ship that had been rafted. We rafted to the idle ship. And the anchor stopped 10 feet from a direct hit and probably would have sunk the smaller vessel. So that's an anecdote that I never want to say again, but it was a funny story because it had an outcome that wasn't disastrous, quite frankly. My brother will never let me forget it. Question?
Yes. You mentioned housing.
Yes.
At the bow and out. And I have a picture of the Ashcroft at home in my living room, and I was looking at it yesterday, wondering, and the reason I ask is my dad was an engineer on the Lake Coast, and by the time I was old enough to go on trips with him, all the housing was at the back, at the rear. Yeah. So I was looking at the picture of the Ashcroft today, and I was wondering, where was the galley? And who had to do the walking back and forth? Was the captain from the, I don't know if this is technical matter you've heard of you, but.
Yeah. No, sorry. What's your name, sir?
Edward O'Brien.
Edward asks, for those online, Edward asks, the split housing of the vessels from canalers, the Ashcroft, to present day, mid-century Lakers to present day Lakers, basically. So eventually the canalers gave way to the Seaway ships that were almost the same characteristic, but the Seaway ships were much bigger in length and size. And most recently, the Lakers are now, everything is aft. So basically, back to your question, the galley's in the stern, the galley's aft. So anyone who wants to go for a meal, coffee, donuts, darts, you put on your winter coat in the bad weather and you walk back aft. Yeah. And it's just something, it's funny, in the book we talk about this a little bit about, we call it a house divided chapter. And we talk about what it's like living forward. There's a whole society living forward. What it's like living aft, and there's a whole society living aft. They have their own tasks, their own work. They have their own outlook on things. But also, they work together. I'm not implying there's a division there. They work together. But the navigating crew lives forward and the engineering crew lives aft. The engineering crew has the luxury of the galley being close. They have the burden of the noise, though, of the machinery, where if you lived up forward, sure, you have to walk for your meals, but you'll never sleep better in your life because it's quiet and it's gentle and the ship rocks just naturally for you to sleep. So that's a big advantage. Thank you for your question. A couple more questions. Yeah.
So you mentioned the blog the other day, like for some very new to Seaway, the ships and stuff like that, interested in learning more. Is there any blog that you would suggest or some readings to look into so when I see a ship, I know what it is?
Sure. What's your name, sir?
It's Michael Dawson.
Michael's asking if there's an information source or sources online that are good to know about the lakes and the lakes community. You're sitting right next to someone who could help you there on your left. Helen runs Ship Junkies. It's the Ship Junkies, the all-female online source for Great Lakes information. Helen and Janie do that. But also, that's a great source. But also, so is Know Your Ships out of the US. Roger, I believe. Andrea, she's got the Upper Lakes covered. Andrea, Dre Designs. So there's plenty. But I would suggest start locally with Helen, and she could give you more information before you leave tonight. And then you'll find that they typically support each other. So it's no competition. It's really just being part of the community. And there's plenty of sources of information, active information, because what they do, which is fascinating, is they'll tell you in real time what the ships are doing, where they're at, who's on board. They know the captains by name. They know the cargoes. They've been on board. So those are great sources. And perhaps uniquely in this area, North America, you'll get to know the people who run the ships. And that's part of the big allure of the subject matter, including in the book, is that you get to know the people. You are part of their community as much as they are part of your community. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Are there any news bits, maybe piracy or mutiny, rebellion, that?
What's your name, sir? Mike's asking, does Canada have pirates? So, yeah. I don't think so, but I've been around tremendously Sorry. Yeah, no, it's funny. We typically ship bulk commodities on the lake, so it's hard to steal like 26,000 tons of iron ore. But there are things that go on, I'm sure, that aren't included in this book. But piracy, as we probably know in general in this room, piracy occurs on the saltwater in areas and danger areas where ship owners have to take protections for their crew, including sometimes armed security when they're sailing through those waters. I correct myself. In our book, we have a small story, anecdote of a ship captain I met one time in Baltimore, I think. He was working on a ship that belonged to a Canadian company, so I went down to do some work there. And I asked him about his experiences, and he was stoic and didn't even hint that there's any danger on board his vessel. But then I asked the cook. So if you want to know anything on a ship, just ask the cook. It's just a natural thing, right? And then we got talking, and the captain spoke English, the cook was Ukrainian, but I learned that they were involved in an incident in Africa one time where a civil war occurred overnight. And the owner wired the ship and said, get out of port, just leave, just get out of there, it's dangerous. So they literally cut their lines and escaped in the dark of night, and the captain ordered everyone below decks and locked down. Right? As the ship was steaming out, the captain was alone on the bridge, and he felt a tap on his shoulder, and he said, oh, the gig is up, I'm in trouble. And he turned around, it was a cook, and she brought him a cup of tea and said, I thought you needed this tonight. Nice story. Very nice story. But so that's an example, I assume, perhaps of not piracy, but a bit of an insurrection domestically that would have affected that vessel. So the captain got the ship to safety, basically, with a bit of tea.
A question from the online audience. Questions from Nancy. She says that as a kid who grew up in Hollywood, I'm interested in shipbuilding. Can you talk about where some of the ships in your book were built?
That's a great. That's a great question. The majority of the ships in this book that are featured were built on the inland in places like Collingwood shipyards, Port Weller on the canal, Thunder Bay, Lévis, Quebec, and various shipyards in America. I'm more familiar with the Canadian shipyards. I've never really been to a shipyard in the US, but I've been to all of those I've mentioned just now. So the majority of the vessels would have been built domestically on yards in North America. We don't do a lot of domestic Lakers building anymore. Some of the newer Lakers that you'll see, including those that are all aft in configuration, would have been built overseas and transited over for lakes trade. So they would have been built in shipyards overseas. But the ships featured in this book, to a large degree, they were built not too far from where we're standing. Back in the day, I suppose Doug could inform us about the Kingston shipyard because the museum is located there. So he probably has more to say about the Kingston shipyard than I'll ever know. So maybe ask Doug. Sorry, Doug.
Well, that type of ship wasn't built as Kingston shipyard.
Right.
Too big, really.
Yeah, it was probably the smaller canalers would have been built
Yeah,
there.
and military corvettes.
Good question. Yeah.
So could you just repeat Doug's comment?
Sorry, Doug mentions that Kingston shipyard would have built smaller vessels, probably canalers, some military vessels like corvettes, because it's a smaller footprint at that shipyard, so they couldn't handle ships of this size, which are 730 feet, thereabouts. I think we have a question in the front.
You know, when I first came to, it's Dick, when I first came to Kingston at the end of the 50s, it was all in the winter, there was all of the lake boats tied up. There was quite a number of them down by the elevator, and eventually over time they all disappeared. So you either went out of service or whatever. The question I have is, where do most of the current fleet winter?
That's a very good question, Dick. Thank you. Dick's asking where do lake ships tie up in the winter when the seaway is frozen, right? And the simple answer is wherever there's a free berth. And that comes back to trading, so that if a ship owner plans it so that the ship needs to be in a location when spring allows for the seaway to open, they'll strategically plan it that way. That said, if they need to rush a cargo before it freezes, and it just means any port in a storm, they'll choose that port for wintering if there's berthing available. So in some cases, and I saw it as a boy, just like you probably saw it here in Kingston or nearby, they'll raft the vessels together because the berth availability is slight, right? So in some cases, I've seen, I think, maybe 5 ships rafted together to maximize the space availability for winter layup.
Just like what they do on the Rhine River with the cruise boats now.
Oh, is that right?
They put them all together because there's limited
Right.
docking and you have to go through.
Right.
So would there be some down to say a Sept-Îles or would there?
No, I think there could be, but Sept-Îles is a year-round port, right? So there's a lot of cargo going in and out all the time. So the vessels probably wouldn't winter there. And also logistically, the funny thing about winter layup is not so much, and I'll contradict myself. So it's not any port in a storm, really. It's where they could also then get to the vessel when they need to do maintenance. So you're not going to put a vessel perhaps in Sept-Îles if your home office is in Montreal or Toronto or somewhere, because then you have to bring spare parts or crews to work winter work, and it's too far away. So they'll try to be smart about it and keep it really central, just because, it just makes more sense to do so. But it'll come down to port availability. Some of the vessels will book well in advance, and you'll know that vessel's going to that port, let's say Hamilton, for the winter. You'll know that. In some other cases, it's because she couldn't make it to Hamilton. She had a breakdown, or there was fog, or winter light, whatever happens, then they'll find an option for that vessel, right? But it's not a science, but it's a bit of a science. Thank you for the question.
I have a question from Edward. Your book is titled Seaway Queens. Is the actual ship the Seaway Queen mentioned in your book?
Yeah, Edward asked, is is a Seaway Queen, namesake of the book Seaway Queens, mentioned in the book. In fact, she's shown in the book. And the fun part there is my wife tolerates my passion for ships, and sometimes will go out of her way to surprise me. So she found a transparency of the Seaway Queen. Beautiful, there's an image in the book. Beautiful shot of her in sailing on maybe Lake Ontario. And it's just so mystic and wonderful. And she bought it and surprised me. So of course it's in the book. And we give her a credit for that too. Good question. Michelle?
The next one online, so it's from Howard, who says, in his 70s now, growing up on the St. Lawrence Canal, as well as working on boats during the early days of the Seaway, do you have any stories and pictures related to those days in your book? So I guess pre-Seaway or early Seaway.
So the Seaway opened in '59. So we have a bunch of, so we try to include information that even goes back to the very early days of shipping, when shipping was created, and then somewhat chronologically move into the modern era. So naturally, when that comes to the Great Lakes, we do talk about canalers, the forerunners to the larger Seaway vessels, and some of the trades that the canalers would partake in, right? So there is discussion in the book about vessels from pre-Seaway years, and then the transition to the bigger vessels in '59, and then the modern era. I think the interesting thing might be that when the owners began to realize the Seaway would allow the ships to become much, much bigger, they anticipated that and they started pre-planning, and the build occurred kind of quickly, I would say, from early '50s, even before the Seaway, to anticipate the larger dimensions of the locks. But there were a good number of ships built when the Seaway was introduced, and I would suggest that it's related. Like the freshwater trade's related to post and pre, because the dimensions of the ships, although bigger post Seaway, borrowed from the characteristics of the smaller vessels pre-Seaway. So I would think there's a bit of harmony between the design of the vessels, and of course that's what the book talks about. So the aesthetic of the larger vessels wasn't necessarily diminished just because they were bigger at the time. In fact, they borrowed from the canalers prior to the Seaway. Questions?
My name's Doug. I'm wondering, the canal boat you referred to, were obviously on the Trent Severn. What were the dimensions of these?
The dimension, Doug's asking what were the dimensions of the canalers. They varied from sort of really small canalers in the, let's say, 270 to 280 foot range, up to about 350 in length and about 50 feet in width. So there was no exact measure for the canalers, except that on the bigger end, let's say the 350 by 50, it's all a matter of maximizing the lift of cargo you could achieve in a confined space. So if you look at canalers, or even Seaway ships today, it's very, very box-oriented, because you're looking at a chamber, a Seaway lock, or a marine lock that allows for only a certain dimension to achieve maximum lift capacity in that dimension. You couldn't build them bigger, even if you wanted to, because they just wouldn't fit, right? So the canalers, although small, at the time they maxed out. A lot of them did for the smaller channels. These days, Doug, the Seaway vessels not only max out, they kind of just squeak in, into the locks, and that's all about what they call lift, how much you can lift with that space you're allowed, right? So they have to be smart about their dimensions. So you can't build bigger. You can only build what's tolerated. Beside Doug.
It's Chris from the museum.
Chris.
You evoked, if you will, the romance of going down as a young guy to the docks.
Yes.
And you're drawn to that wonderful world of the ships and the people who sail on the ships. And in my time at the museum, I've become very appreciative of the support and the relationship that is very close with the shipping industry. And of course, we have important collections and so forth, and we've done exhibits themed in that area. But one of the things that I've picked up, and most of us in New Zealand, Doug will depending on those discussions, when we meet with industry CEOs and senior management, they're very concerned today about the ability to recruit people. And they're saying that romance factor is long gone. And it's harder and harder to get young people to think that's a great career for me on the waters of Seaway and other things.
So Chris's question would be related to how do we attract young people to the trade, to marine transportation? Yeah, thanks, Chris. It is interesting, although the book doesn't preach or reach for young people, the hope is that the storytelling might be slightly interesting, so they could imagine themselves in the story. Related, in the other part of my job is I do creative development and marketing and branding for different organizations. And just last year, so to your question, how do we recruit? Just last year, I delivered for a group based in Ottawa, a campaign called Imagine Marine. So we created a dialogue surrounding Imagine Marine because it's all about imagination. It's not necessarily about offering great salaries, they do. Benefits, they do. Vacation, yep. All of that, it's there, training, the whole thing. If we're not reaching out to have people imagine whatever, we're going to miss the target, right? So I created a campaign called Imagine Marine to sort of spark that imagination I think you're talking about. And how do you get young people to even consider marine? Because there's a lot of competition out there. You know, people and young people these days more than ever, they're smart and they could pick and choose where they would want to work. Why not marine? And that's the whole point of the slogan Imagine Marine, because it's almost maybe even a challenge to have people say, what about marine? I'd like to imagine myself in marine. And I think it also, I cheated. I think I borrowed thinking from Einstein. I think you said, between knowledge and imagination, he'll choose imagination. It's not exactly that, but it's close enough. Yeah. Michelle?
Not me, it's the people online here. They're bugging me. Right, yeah, so this next question comes from Justin.
Justin.
And does your book provide the names and dates of the linkers, the story of why they were named after their namesake, and where they ended up or were scrapped?
Justin asks, sorry, I don't have to repeat that because Justin's question is interesting because naming of vessels is interesting because sometimes the owners will name the vessels after a sponsor of the vessel, a client, a politician, and so on and so forth. So there are lots of reasons why owners choose names of vessels, but then to follow those names, I would suggest is somewhat difficult, at least for me, to tell that story because it's almost a book by itself, quite frankly. I was involved with a campaign with Canada Steamship Lines once where they rebuilt vessels. I think there were 4 or 5 existing vessels. So they cut the forward end off the existing vessel, kept the engine room, and attached a new forward end to the engine room. So essentially, it's the same vessel, same engine room, same galley, but a forward end, and they renamed it. And it takes you a long time to say, oh, it's no longer that vessel, it's this vessel, but it's the same vessel. So the naming is curious. It's a very good question, actually, but it's hard because it's not obvious. I think that there are some books that probably do that, and boatnerd.com, quite frankly, Boatnerd will tell you the whole history of the vessels from their build to their retirement, including all their namings over the years. But related, maybe a little bit, in the book, I do talk about one vessel that was part of a previous company, and they renamed it. And the vessel when it was built, it was called Feu Follet, and it translates roughly into wisp of the water, a wisp on the water. And the owner named it after a ballet troupe that he quite liked. Just beautiful story. And when he sold the business and the vessel was acquired, they named it Canadian Leader or something like that. And in the book, I quip, I hope I don't take too much challenge here, but I said it's the worst naming in the history of the world. You went from Feu Follet to Canadian Leader. I just like the first name better.
Oh, next. Go ahead.
It's Gail. I'm just wondering about the app. When you purchase the book, do you get access to it? How does that work?
Thanks, Gail. The question is, do you get the app with the book? And the answer is the app is for free. So you could download the app anytime. So when you do have the book, we've put 3 or 4 fixed photos in place where we say you could see the content on your app with this photo. So you could give it a go. In the future, we will add more content, and we'll probably let you know, through email or through posting online about new content becoming available. So the app is free, and it's brand new. So as you give it a go and test it, I'd like to hear your feedback, because it's quite fantastic. But it's all a matter of getting used to it too, by the way. So you have your app, and you give it a go on the photo. If at first it doesn't succeed, just try it again, and you'll get it, and eventually you'll see video playing on your phone. Michelle has a question.
Another question online from Norma. When was the last ship built in Canada and where?
That's a good question. The last ship built in Canada, Lake's vessel. Oh boy, I'm going to get in trouble because I know a lot of people who know this answer right away. But I think it might have been something like the Prairie Harvest that turned into the Atlantic Huron for Canada's steamship lines. Or was it the Pine Glen? I forget. But anyways, it's probably about 1981 vintage, and probably built at Port Weller Dry Docks. Yeah, but the example I give, and maybe I'm wrong, but let's say it's the Prairie Harvest built as a laker with no self-unloading gear. She would have been repurposed as a self-unloader, so they put self-unloading gear on her, and when they did so, they renamed her Atlantic Huron. So again, it's either that vessel or another, but it's about 1980, 81.
Not necessarily built from scratch.
No, she was built as what they call a straight deck laker, which means it doesn't have self-unloading gear. So the self-unloading technology, which we speak of in the book, was introduced to her, and she was renamed differently. But the characteristic of her trade too probably changed too, because as a self-unloader, she did probably the same bulk cargoes, but she did a lot faster, and probably had more trips in the season than she ever did as the original Prairie Harvest. A question, sorry.
I grew up on the Welland Canal, or the south end of the Welland Canal in Brooklyn. I remember as a kid, really small, we just called them lakers, going through, and assuming that was a canal, or 60s, early 60s, they would have gone to Thunder Bay.
Yes.
Small craft like that, anything, right? The canal itself, they're called canalers. Where was that canal? Is it in the same location as the Seaway is today, or in a different location?
So, sorry, your name is? Walt asked about one of the earlier versions of the Welland Canal.
No, sorry. So downstream of Kingston.
Oh, Kingston, sorry, yeah.
I grew up in Port Colborne.
Oh, I see.
On the Welland Canal, so
Yeah.
I saw the ships.
Oh, I see. So, but you're speaking of the canals in this area.
Yeah, so the St. Lawrence.
Yeah, like there are a number of canals that probably branch off from the St. Lawrence between here and where I live in Montreal that are smaller canals, like the Soulange Canal or Trent Severn Canal. I live on the Lachine Canal near my house. And so those would have handled smaller canalers, vessels transiting like between Montreal and Lake Ontario. as an example. So those smaller canals would actually go right through the communities, you know, the downtowns in some cases of the towns and cities. And it's funny because it's a great question actually, because I met a sailor once and he was more mature. He had been sailing for years and years. And I asked him about, hey, what was it like sailing back in the day? And he was working on canalers. And he was talking about going on the Lachine Canal with his vessel where I live. And he said, we used to walk the ship to Ontario. I said, well, what does that mean? So he would literally stand alongside when it was his watch on the lock side, and tend the rope. And the ship would steam along at, let's say, 2 knots or 3 knots, just gently, because she had to account for pedestrian traffic or city traffic, whatever. So she couldn't steam full, so she steamed slowly. So they would tend the ropes and just walk with the ship on their watch. And he said, we'd walk the ship to Ontario, right? So as you change shift, you just get off the ship and keep walking with the vessel, always like walking your dog, kind of, right? Holding the rope along the way. It's smaller vessels. There are some photos in the book that show how small they were. Still, though, they carried tremendous amounts of cargoes as compared to trucks or whatever, but they were small ships, yeah. And you know, they carried maybe not only just bulk commodities, but they had stuff, you know, like bundles of newsprint or fabric, or in some cases cars, you know, that would come on board, or boxes of tomato soup or stuff like that, you know, and just bring them on board. You know. It's a good question. Thank you.
A couple of thoughts. One, you talked about the new era of the Seaway 59 after they opened. Was it the planning such that all of the 3 major canals in St. Lawrence and Welland and the Soo were of the same dimension, so that no vessels were held up in one lake and not getting to the other? Was that part of the grand plan?
Okay, so the question is, do all 3 lock systems enable standardized shipping, for example, right? The quick answer is no, but it's almost by design that the lock system in the upper lakes doesn't care. The vessels on the American side are a lot bigger. Some of them, they're landlocked, actually. They can never see salt water. They'll never get beyond Welland Canal, right? So their interest, the American side, was to create vessels that can carry enormous amounts of cargoes, probably double or maybe almost triple the size of Canadian capacity.
Duluth to the field.
Correct. Yeah. So they would, I think the record might be something like 76,000 tons of ore out of Duluth or something like this. It's crazy. But they would never be able to steam beyond Lake Erie. But it didn't matter because the American trade was such that that was their interest, to go to the mills of Lake Erie, Lake Michigan. So that was all they needed. Whereas the Canadian side, you had vessels that needed to trade beyond the lakes and onto the river here and down towards my home and also the North Shore of Quebec. So you needed a vessel that was perfectly situated or perfectly built to achieve both trade on northern Quebec routes right up into the heartland. And they could theoretically go, they go from Duluth all the way down to the St. Lawrence, Gulf of St. Lawrence. And in the book we talk about, I made this up, it's funny to me anyway, but I call it Goldilocks ships. They're not too big, they're not too small, they're just right. They fit into the locks, and that's all that was mattering, that mattered to the owners. But it's a great question because the Soo lock, the Soo locks are bigger, they accommodate Canadian vessels. The Canadian locks are smaller, they can't accommodate the biggest American vessels. But somehow the whole system works, right? So, but when you do see the 1,000-foot Lakers up on the American side, you quickly get the idea that they're not going to fit the Seaway. They're just enormous. Question?
You mentioned the American, it's Ken, by the way.
Ken?
Yeah. You mentioned the American system. I had a thought or impression that somehow or other the Americans went south through Michigan and out through down Mississippi somewhere.
Ken asked us if the American ships access the Mississippi from, let's say, the Upper Lakes, and they do, but not the Lakers. The Lakers kind of stay on the lakes, right? But yes, correct. The barges, there's a whole tremendous infrastructure on the Mississippi that actually comes, if I'm right, I think it comes as far north as Chicago mainly, right? But if you look at websites like marinetraffic.com, boat nerd. So if you look at marinetraffic.com and you look at all the little dots on the Mississippi, those are mainly barges until you get down toward New Orleans and some of the inland ports down there that could accommodate saltwater ships coming upstream, right? But mainly they're barges.
Saltwater ships are going to be smaller.
Yeah, they probably are smaller coming upstream because eventually the Mississippi would not allow, probably mainly for depth, would not allow for deeper draft vessels too far north. Oh, repeat question?
Well, carry on.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah.
My understanding, saltwater too, is they had to navigate rougher water. And so the long Lakers would break up in
Yeah, that's a really great question. So could Lakers withstand the stresses of ocean trade? It's a fascinating question, and I always defer to people a lot smarter than me. But what I learned was the dynamic stress on the steel on the ocean would not allow essentially long and narrow Lakers to survive because the weight of their stress would not be supported across the wave profile. On the ocean, and I've been sailing on the ocean a couple times, the swells and the wave pattern are long and continuous, and sometimes you feel like you're straddling, Whereas if you're on the lakes and you get choppy weather, the wave pattern is smaller, it's tighter, and again, take it from me, the steel is better supported across a smaller profile of wave dynamic. Question? Yes.
Hi, thanks, Laura.
Hey, Laura.
So I know with pleasure craft, you have to put differently saltwater. Same apply for the lake.
So Laura's asking if there's reason to build Lakers differently as compared to ships that are built for saltwater, right? And the quick answer is yes, Laura. The really complex answer is if you're able to peel back the hull of a Laker, you might find that she's built with less steel than a saltwater ship, which allows her to carry more cargo, which is the whole point. Over time, and including using technology, even that steel has been lessened so that they could achieve even more cargo lift. But the technology of the build, including the coatings to prevent it from corroding, are vastly superior to the time when these Lakers were built. So these Lakers were probably proportionally heavier, these Lakers, compared to the modern Lakers. But because technology allows for smarter build and better protection of the scantling, they call it, the ribs of the ship, the vessel could lift more. So the question really comes down to money. They could build a strong Laker that could go on the ocean, but if they did so, that same Laker could not carry as much cargo through the locks because she would be heavier herself. Her own weight would have to be applied to the draft on a Seaway, which means she couldn't carry as much cargo. So on the lakes, there's a trade-off, right? You want to carry as much cargo as you can through the locks to make more profit. Yeah. Doug has a question.
Well, just further to this conversation about Lakers versus vessels, a lot of the larger CSL and non-boom ships and so forth that are built in China these days, there are Lakers designed for the Great Lakes. And how do they get them from China to Great Lakes? Is they weld a lot of the hatches along the top of the deck shut, and that acts like an I-beam and gives it that extra stability to span those larger wave crests on the ocean. And then when they come to Montreal, wherever, they break all those welds open, and then you have structurally a Laker again.
Yeah, so Doug's point about how you get a ship across the ocean, is,
Well, that's-
no, I know, but because I asked that same question, it's a funny question to be asking. How do you get a ship across the ocean? You sail it. But to do so, because it's a laker and because they like to bend, right? Doug makes a great observation. They had to stiffen it. They had to stiffen the steel to get it to North America. So here's how you do it. You leave China, you take a right, you go down to Davao, Philippines, you top up with fuel and supplies, and you take a hard left, and you follow the equator straight to Panama in the best weather you could ever hope for. So it's summertime, because you never want to chance it, and you just come up through the canal and eventually come up the eastern seaboard. So to your point, it's exactly what Doug says. You prepare the vessel for the voyage alone, and then once she's here, you strip her down of all the excess steel. But you also do it with weather planning, because you don't want to be on the ocean open, not stiffen with a laker. If they're not designed for it, don't go. But I think that's the essence of boating. Yeah, good point, Doug.
But the book, is it only cargo vessels, or do you do any passenger vessels? And corollary, in terms of the modern Lakers, is there any move to go to anything other than bulk, like, or to containers, which is the other dimension? And is there any move to container ships on big boats?
The question is, do we cover passenger vessels in our book? And the second part of the question is, will Lakers be repurposed or multi-purpose to also carry containerized cargo? We do only in passing talk about passenger ships as part of the conversation of design aesthetic. So we will talk about the transatlantic liners like the Normandie, where she has a beautiful bow and cruiser stern and elegant lines, and how they might have been borrowed on some of the lake vessels. So that's only a conversation about passenger travel as relates to the design of the vessel. As for containerized cargo, I don't think we talk about it at all in this book, but the grander discussion about multi-purposing the vessels to carry something other than bulk, there have been examples where ships may have been repurposed to carry wind turbine blades on their decks, because the decks are so long and accessible that they carry turbine blades. And in some cases, I think I just read about the Barker, the new vessel on the American side. She was carrying dimensional steel in her hold for a project, I think. But it makes sense because she has one long continuous hold, so she could take lots of stuff in there. It doesn't have to be bulk. That's what she's designed for. But in this case, she carried dimensional cargo. But the overall conversation about containerization of Great Lakes ships, I don't think it applies to Lakers. It might apply when you multi-purpose a vessel to be able to carry containerized cargo with bulk, but that's a whole other vessel, because they have to have different characteristics about their stability and so on. I don't think, and I'm not an architect, but I don't think you could pile lots of containers on a laker economically or safely, because they're not designed for that. Question.
Hi, it's Cheryl. I'm wondering a bit about what the life might be of someone who works on the lake. What does their schedule look like? What's available to them on the ships? I'm wondering those kinds of things.
So the question from Cheryl is, what's life like working aboard and living aboard a lakes vessel? It's shift oriented, primarily for most of the crew. Helen could tell us some more about that. 4-hour shifts, typically, and sometimes you will have day workers who might work from 8 until 5 with lunch in between, but oftentimes you're working on a watch. So your watch is midnight to 4, or 4 to 8, or 8 to 12, depending on your seniority. The best watch, I think, is 8 to 12. You get to go uptown after your watch. So the more senior people have the better watches, and the younger officers and crew, they'll get the midnight shift. So you typically get into a rhythm of working 4 hours on, 8 hours less your meals off, 4 hours back on again, round the clock. But that doesn't mean you kick your feet up until your shift starts again or your watch starts again, you're called whenever you're needed. So you could be at sleep for an hour or two, but if you have to go through a lock or make a dock or begin your cargo unload, you might be called out of your bunk prior to the start of your next watch. You know? So you do get into the rhythm of 4 hours. And I'm told by sailor friends when they go home from vacation, it's an adjustment because they're always waking up at 3:45 or 3:30 in the morning because that's what you do on a ship. So it takes a bit of time to get back into the rhythm of being home. So the lifestyle on the ship is very much what's hanging the clock on the wall, and you have to match it according to your requirement, your watch requirement. Good question, Michelle.
Maybe just one or two more, and we can, we'll wrap up. And then anybody who has questions afterwards, we're obviously welcome to give specifically. The other question online is from Howard. Does your book include stories about World War II canal efforts and convoy duty, example being CSL McGaw?
So the book doesn't necessarily talk about the war effort when it comes to the canal vessels or any vessels. We do quickly reference, I think, various wars and conflicts just as part of the story, but we don't focus on that. There are books that might and will do a better job than we would. Ours strictly deal with, again, back to the design and the beauty of the vessels mainly. But there is a whole rich history, of course, and that's a great question by Howard, because there's a rich and proud history of merchant mariners supporting the war effort. Ken.
40 years ago, my parents used to take ships, Saguenay shipping, and they'd go down through the Panama Canal and down to South America on freighters.
Yeah.
And so they used to, that was 40 years ago, they used to say that there would be like 8 private passengers kind of thing, and they wined and dined with the captain. And they loved it because when they went to port, they'd be in the port for 3 days or something.
Yeah.
And it wasn't 1,200 people getting off on buses, there's 8 of them.
Yeah.
And they loved it.
Yeah.
They did quite a few trips.
So Ken's referencing how people will sometimes take freighter cruises, and it's still, such as your parents, I think you said. Yeah, it exists. I know because I'm planning one soon, maybe in a couple of years. And my goal is to do a trip around the world with never getting on an airplane. So I'd like to plan a freighter cruise and hopscotch across and around, and just follow wherever the merchant vessel follows and go according to their rhythm, which I quite appreciate. I'm not a big cruise ship fan. There it is. But I do like the aspect of stopping in a port and having multiple days as opposed to an excursion, if you know what I mean. So yeah. So I could appreciate that for sure. Don't tell my wife about the round the trip thing. Around the world.
Want to do your trivia question?
There's a trivia question. I'm going to remember it too, I think. But the trivia question is, the Great Lakes Seaway extends geographically in the west from a point to in the east to a point. If somebody would like to offer an answer to that, you might just win a book or a poster. So from the west, geographically, and we'll take 60 miles radius, and then to the east, geographically, if you could just name an area or a port, we'll take that.
Talking about Black Law.
No, just a place name. A place name. Place names, yeah. Oh, Cheryl. Almost, but not quite. So Cheryl said the Soo Locks to Montreal, but not. So just to qualify the question a bit better, we'll call it the Great Lakes St. Lawrence system, right? So we have an answer. We have a good answer. Sept-Îles to Thunder Bay is the correct answer. Sept-Îles to Thunder Bay. So if you look on a map, or when you do look on a map next, and you look at Anticoste Island in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and you look at Sept-Îles, thereabouts, that's kind of where the system starts. 66 degrees west, I think they call it. And then up to Thunder Bay or even Duluth in America is the lakehead. So that's the extent of the system. And I think it's about 1,600 miles linear. It's a pretty huge system. Yeah. Yeah. Mike nailed it. Score.
I realized that we didn't give an opportunity for anybody online to
Okay.
ask questions. So what I'm going to do is
Yeah.
I'll based on I'm going to do 2 draws for the questions.
Okay.
For everyone who joined online. Well done, everybody in person.
And does that include, Michelle, the poster as well? I think it does. Okay, good.
Yes.
You could open up the tube if you like to show people what the poster, if you like, but
Unless you show people online what the poster looks like, and then show anybody in person.
posters are a bit fussy, so they ding easily, so you have to be a bit careful. There are 2 in there.
I'll let you handle them.
Yeah. I'll give you one back, just so I don't mess up. Oh. Take one. There you go. So the poster, I'll get back to the microphone. The poster is based on the Cassandra design, Art Deco design. So this is the Ryerson. So we're calling her the most beautiful vessel ever built on the lakes. And the design of the poster is very much a nod toward the Cassandra design of the Normandie, including you could even see the shadowing where the sun hits the bow, and the small wave action, and you could really get a feel that you could touch this vessel. The poster and the book was designed by Salma, who works with me, Salma Belhafaf. So she signed it. I think her signature's up here, and the poster is numbered. So it's a limited edition poster. So the winner is going to be quite happy, I think. And like the cruise ships, we put destinations on the bottom, so where she would have traded.
So the question we had it set up so I'm gonna draw the name in a second here for the poster, and that was anybody who participated in the Q&A. And then the book prize is given to the person who gets the trivia question right. So that would be
So in closing, I would just like to offer that perhaps in person and also online, you should find time to visit your local marine museum and support it if you can. Find ways of supporting it, which you actually are all doing tonight, so bravo to everyone. Locally, and people watching online will know this, across America, there's lots of little marine museums and bigger marine museums, and the American community is quite supportive of the Great Lakes industry in those towns. So you're not alone in your support of marine. They do a great job. So thank you again for the warm welcome tonight. Great participation. I had a blast. It was fun. Thank you so much. Stall? Michelle's busy wrapping up. Wrapping up. We're going to do the draw live? Okay, good. Yeah. And if you win, you have to speak.
Just going to jumble them up.
We have a winner.
Oh, we got a couple winners.
There you go.
All right, so the winner of the copy of the book in person is Cheryl. Where'd she go? There you are. Perfect. Congratulations. So this is a brother. Hi. There we go. I would just like to say thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed the talk as much as I did. A quick reminder that the next one is on the 25th of January with Ian McCulloch, who's going to be talking about, the title of the presentation is Bateaus and Whaleboats. Bradstreet's, oh my goodness, I forgot the second half. Bradstreet's bateau service and the siege of Fort Frontenac. And this, I'm sorry, I have it written down. Siege of Fort Frontenac, 1758. So it's a local history story, and we're getting a bit more into French history in Kingston. So that should be a great topic as well. Of course, after that, we have the next one is on the 8th of February with, again, a local speaker talking about Indigenous food sovereignty and more so located at Indigenous fisheries in Northern Lake Superior. I encourage you to check out the rest of our series, join us back in person, or you're also welcome to join us virtually. When you register, that link should be provided in the confirmation email. If you're having any concerns about it, please feel free to reach out by email or phone. And otherwise, I would just like to say thank you again, once again, Jim, for coming down to Kingston and for joining us this evening. And of course, if you're interested in purchasing the book, they are available for sale this evening as well, and you can get your own personal signature there. So thank you once again for joining us, and thank you, Jim.
Yes, that's right.
All right.
Yeah.